back. I'm back. Welcome, welcome. Thanks for taking that 5-minute break with me. And I guess the way we'll do this, I'll wait for everyone to pile back in, all the people to pile back in. Wait for y'all to pile back in. I'll start answering people's super chat questions. That's how we'll do it, is I'll start answering your super chat questions. And then once people are piled back in, we'll do the roll call. We'll put off the roll call for now. And I'll start answering your super chat questions that I've got written down here. And then from there, after we're a little while into this, then from there I'll start doing the roll call. But now, as we're waiting for people to come back in, roll call doesn't really work. So, all right. First super chat question I have received. The person says, I'm unemployed, broke. How can I advance the cause of socialism? Well, if you are unemployed and broke, you have one thing that many people do not have. And you know what that is? You have time. You have time. You are not busy running to work. You are unemployed. So with that time, you can use your time to promote socialism. You can start a reading group around the Center for Political Innovation Educational Manual. You could get involved with some of the outreach that's going on. The John Brown volunteers have organized. There are things you can do if you are unemployed. And like I said, if you're unemployed, you have time. Other people do not have time. So if you're unemployed, you may not have money. You may be struggling to get by, but you do have more time than other people. And as Kinky said in the chat, time is precious. So with your time, think about how you can use your time to promote socialism. That is what you can do with being unemployed. That is my advice to you. The role of Bukharin in the Russian Revolution. Well, if I'm not mistaken, there was an incident just before the Bolsheviks took power where Zinoviev and Bukharin basically announced to the capitalist media, to the mainstream press, that the Bolsheviks were planning to seize power and that they didn't agree with it. And Lenin was furious that they would do such a thing. They voted against the decision to seize power. And then when it was looking like the Bolsheviks were going to go ahead and seize power, they then announced to the capitalist media that they opposed it. Lenin wanted them expelled from the party. He wanted them expelled from the party for doing that, and the rest of the Bolshevik Central Committee announced, basically outruled him, overruled Lenin, and they were not expelled from the party. And it's a famous incident, and it reveals that the Bolsheviks were very much a coalition. The way Bolshevik history is generally told, we get the idea that it was the cult of Lenin, that Lenin was the great leader, and all the Bolsheviks bowed before Lenin and his greatness. That started later. The cult of Lenin, that started with the mausoleum, and that was built because of Stalin. Stalin, in order to unify the country, he kind of deified Lenin. He put Lenin in a mausoleum. He said that the ideology of the party was Marxism, Leninism, and the cult of Lenin really started after Lenin's death. And it was done for political reasons, and it was very effective. It was necessary to unify the Soviet Union, to give it an iconic figure, a patron saint, if you will. Leninism, Marxism, Leninism was very much the creation of what the Soviet Union emerged to become in the years after Lenin's death. But the Bolsheviks were a coalition. Zinoviev, Bukharin, Kamenev. Trotsky and Lenin hated each other, absolutely hated each other. And when Lenin had wanted to form the party of a new type in the Bolsheviks in 1903, Trotsky had opposed it, instead tried to set up something called the August Bloc. And but even still, in July of 1917, Trotsky and his followers joined the Bolsheviks and merged into the Bolshevik Party. Why? Because Lenin wanted to win. He wanted to win. And when you want to win, you want people to be your ally, not your enemy. All right? Trotsky and Lenin didn't like each other. But Lenin said, we're in it to win it. We need as many people on our side as we possibly can. So this Trotsky asshole that we've been fighting with, well, he's got a good group and he agrees with our points. And so we're going to bring Trotsky into the Bolshevik Party. Now, Trotsky ended up, being a problematic figure later on. But that's the difference. And this is how you can tell if people are real or not, right? if people are looking for allies, they are serious about getting things done. If people are looking for rivals and they're looking to have fights with people, they ain't. And the Marxist movement in our time is not real. And I have been trying to get people to understand this. The socialist and communist movement in our time isn't real. It is not a real political movement. It's not real. It is a lot of people that want to feel good about themselves. It's a lot of people who want other people to look at them and think, wow, what an amazing communist. And it is a battle of egos, and they are not actually trying to win. Because if they were trying to win, they would be going around and trying to build a coalition of people that could actually win. Instead, every communist group is trying to prove to everybody else that they are the greatest communist group and that all the others are phonies. There's a huge amount of backstabbing, and it's childish. It's absolutely childish. And I have no interest in that. No interest whatsoever in that. None. None. I have really no interest in playing that game. I have no interest in it whatsoever. I'm so over that. You know, the XYZ and the QWH and the RCP and the ISO, and none of these groups are serious. None of these groups are serious. If they were serious, they would be trying to make as many friends and allies as they could on the road to taking power. Instead, they're too busy trying to prove that they're the real ones and the others the fake ones, and it's not worth our time. So there you go. Alrighty. Next super chat question. We'll do the roll call here in a little bit as people pile in. Do Americans still believe what the government tells them? No, they don't. And that's a little bit of a problem, right? As much as I'm critical of the U.S. government, as much as I'd like that people are not believing the lies of the government, well, it's a little bit of a problem. And the reason that it's a little bit of a problem is because we're having a thing called a pandemic right now. And people are getting vaccinated. And, you know, people need to be able to believe what their government officials tell them. But the U.S. government has lied so many times. Look, I am not an anti-vaxxer. I have been vaccinated. I encourage people to get vaccinated. I know for a fact that COVID-19 is not a hoax, okay? It's not a hoax. I had it at one point. It was not a hoax, okay? But let me just tell you that that I don't look at the people who think COVID is a hoax or think that vaccines are dangerous or whatever. I don't look at them and blame them. I blame the American government. The American government has lied so many times. The American government has tested, things like LSD on the population. The American government has been dishonest. The American CNN has lied. There have been so many instances where the U.S. government has been deceptive. So the fact that there's millions of Americans who don't trust the U.S. government at a time when it's really important that they do, I don't say, oh, you're just a bunch of stupid rednecks, right? I don't want them disappeared like Vosh wants them to. No, what I want the American government to be honest. I blame the American government and the American system for that, right? And also, I will say that working people are suffering because of these restrictions, right? I know there's new lockdowns now in Australia, and this is affecting people's lives, right? And there's no empathy for how people are being affected by it. Working their lives are devastated. This is the economic fallout of this pandemic has been shocking. And the liberals don't care about that. It's just kind of, well, whatever. They let the evictions moratorium expire. They don't care, right? Meanwhile, the right wing is playing into this idea, it's communism, it's all a government conspiracy. I mean, the problem is that left-wing voices have become synonymous with the status quo. And whenever left-wing voices become synonymous with the status quo, there's a big problem. Big problem. All right. USSR, China, and black liberation. Well, let's go down the line. I mean, Langston Hughes was an African-American poet who was sympathetic to the Soviet Union and was a member of the Communist Party. And I believe at one point he was in the Soviet Union, he was living there, and they were talking to him about even making a film about black people and their rights. I don't think the film was ever produced. But Langston Hughes was definitely a sympathizer with the Soviet Union. Paul Robeson the well-known singer, African-American communist. He very much was a sympathizer with the Soviet Union. He actually sent his children to the Soviet Union to go to school because he found it to be a society free of racism. W.E.B. Du Bois, the amazing African-American scholar, was very much a supporter of the Soviet Union. You can talk about the fact that that the Scottsboro nine African-American men who were falsely accused of rape, they got their legal defense from the Communist Party, the International Labor Defense. That was in the 1930s. Talk about in the 1950s, the case of Emmett Till and the murder of Emmett Till was widely publicized by the Soviet Union. You could talk about how Mao Zedong and China welcomed Robert F. Williams to their country. Robert F. Williams was a leader of the NAACP in Montgomery, North Carolina. What is it? No, not Montgomery. He was in Monroe, North Carolina. And they got into a shootout with the Ku Klux Klan, and then he fled to China, and he fled to Cuba. And for a while, Cuba was supporting him. Firing staff, worker co-ops, right? Yeah. Worker co-op. Nathan Robinson. At that point, he did broadcasts from Cuba called Radio Free Dixie, they were called. That was pretty cool. That was pretty cool. So there you go. There's that. What else? You can talk about how, the Black Panthers, Eldridge Cleaver was welcomed as a hero in North Korea. And China was very supportive of the Black Panthers. Gaddafi's Libya gave money and funding to the Black Panthers and later to the Nation of Islam and other black liberation organizations in the United States. There are many examples of this. This is all extremely important history. And this notion that somehow tankies, people that support, existing socialist countries are the same as Nazis is ridiculous, because these anti-imperialist states have been the biggest supporters of black people in their fight for their rights. And my recent class, I talked extensively about the Communist Party and its role in fighting racism and fighting for the rights of black people. So there you go. All right. Is the fall of Kabul an imperialist reposition? I think so. There's been negotiations going on with the Taliban for many, many years. Donald Trump ultimately reached some kind of deal with the Taliban. We don't know the details of what the deal is. Hari wanted to know about the PKI of Indonesia. All right. Yeah, PKI Indonesia. It seems like the USA has made some kind of arrangement with the Taliban. It looks like all kinds of weapons are going to end up in their hands. The USA just kind of announced we're going to pull out on this day. I feel like the USA wouldn't have done that without at least making some kind of deal with the Taliban. That said, though, let's keep in mind that, and it's also important to note that a lot of these Taliban leaders who are leaders of the Taliban are people handpicked by the United States. Okay, there's the guy who was in prison that Mike Pompeo let out of prison and then kind of appointed it. There's another guy who used to work at Voice of America. He was for 20 years he worked at Voice of America, and he's got ties to the U.S. Department of Defense. But that said, right, the U.S., handpicked the government of Iraq after the invasion of Iraq, but pretty soon they lost control of that government. So there's no guarantee. I feel like the USA has made some kind of arrangement with the Taliban, but that doesn't mean that the Taliban will necessarily be their puppet. I think that, Russia, China, and Iran have a really strong interest in the economic development of Afghanistan. And it's possible that, they're already warning. It's just recently they're already warning about China swooping in and dominating Afghanistan and having Afghanistan join its Belt and Road. They've got op-eds warning about it. So it looks like there's a very good chance the Taliban could start working with Russia and China and Iran in a path of economic development. It's certainly possible. So we shall just have to see. I don't think highly of the Taliban. The Taliban are reactionaries. They've collaborated with imperialism. But at the same time, this isn't the same Taliban. Let's keep in mind, right? A lot of people are pointing this out. The Taliban, but at the same time, they gave a blanket amnesty to all collaborators with the United States. This is a complicated situation. this is a change, right? The strategy of the United States for Eurasia has generally been the use of counter gangs, the fomenting of ethnic division and such, in order to keep the region underdeveloped and sectarian and divided. That has been the strategy of imperialism to dominate Eurasia. But that said, the Taliban may be more independent at this point. So, we just have to see what happens. But it's not right to compare this to Vietnam, because the Taliban is not the Vietnamese National Liberation Front. And the Taliban seems to have made a deal with the United States, and this isn't the USA. That's not the same thing. This was a handoff. The country was handed off to the Taliban, it seems like. There you go. All right. Gulag Archipelago. Solzhenitsyn, a very right-wing individual who critiqued the Soviet Union from a very conservative, orthodox, kind of czarist perspective, was highlighted in U.S. media, really emphasized that the Bolsheviks were not Christian. I think he's the only writer on communism that Jordan Peterson has ever read. And I don't really care much for that stuff. But it's spoon-fed all throughout the United States. I mean, you get it everywhere. I mean, it's more popular. It's interesting. George Orwell and his anti-communism is popular with liberals. Solzhenitsyn is popular with Republicans. The Solzhenitsyn stuff is a little more conservative Republican. That's a little more PragerU, Jordan Peterson kind of people that promote Solzhenitsyn. But it's the same narrative, right? All the Soviet Union ever did was starve and kill and murder people. Nothing was ever achieved, and then, there you go. And yes, he did have a history of anti-Semitism. That's true, as Chaya points out. Did I read all the books behind me? No, because the thing is, I don't approach books, it's not like a movie where you have to start from the beginning. I read parts of books, right? Euromaiden, Ukraine. I read parts of books. I often read sections of books that are interesting to me at one time, and then I move on to the next book. So, some books I will read cover to cover, but most of the time I read the sections that I'm interested in. I read, the part that I'm doing research about for something I'm writing or whatever. Non-fiction books, I don't consume them that way. I consume them in more of an academic way. What about those who dismiss the achievements of socialism as mere industrialization? Well, that's the point. These rapid rates of economic growth, the huge industrialization efforts, the eradication of unemployment and illiteracy and all that is happening in countries that were dirt poor beforehand. These countries were not industrialized. And you'll notice that all over the developing world, there are countries that are capitalists that have never gone through such a transformation. All over Africa, there are countries that are deeply poor, that have never experienced this. All over Latin America, there are places. So if they say, oh, well, that's just industrialization. Why has capitalism not industrialized so much of the world? Why is so much of the world living in pre-industrial conditions? And why is the first world that was industrialized first in a state of decline? Eastern Europe. Recover from USSR collapse. So there you go. Alrighty. Okay. We'll get to the roll call here in a second, actually. All right. Will the withdrawal from Afghanistan, will the USA prepare for another war? I'm concerned that basically, with the USA withdrawing from Afghanistan, now that will basically force a situation where Iran, Russia, and China have to deal with Afghanistan and keeping the peace in Afghanistan more, right? I mean, at the very least, they're going to have to industrialize. Hopefully the Taliban has not been set up to fight them or whatever, but there's going to be some confusion. And with the USA not concentrating its forces in Afghanistan, but Russia and China being more focused on that, I think we're going to see an escalation with Latin America. Alex Saab, right, who's an individual who was extradited by the United States for allegedly doing business in Venezuela. I've done interviews about it. There's that situation, and they're getting ready to go after Nicaragua for their upcoming election, and I worry that there's been a bit of a pivot to Latin America, and that's a concern. But we shall see. But yes, the U.S. imperialists have not given up on their imperial schemes by any means. Did Gorbachev betray the people? I mean, I don't know. Betray the people is like a blanket statement, but Gorbachev took actions that ultimately resulted in dismantling the Soviet Union. and the population largely voted to keep the Soviet Union, and largely says that economically the country was better off with the Soviet Union existing. So, I mean, if that means betrayed the people, I guess that's what it means. Black Book of Communism, it's kind of like Solzhenitsyn. It's one of these big, big books that comes up with these huge numbers of people that died as a result of communism. Capitalism never talks about how capitalism kills all kinds of people, never talks about the achievements of these countries in terms of raising people out of poverty, raising the life expectancy. None of that counts, but every death that happened in the country is solely, the fault of the communist leaders, even though there were famines all the time before they brought in industrialization. And, it's a narrative. It's like a PragerU right-wing narrative. Not good stuff. All right. What should Afghan communists do? Well, I don't know. I think that Afghan communists, well, first of all, I don't know how many of them there are, right? Because there were so many, after the fall of the People's Democratic Party, there was a lot of reprisals and killings. A lot of the Afghan communists just fled. So how many communists are actually in Afghanistan right now? I don't know how many. I know that for a while there was something called the Revolutionary Organization of Afghan Women, and there's like the Communist Party of Afghanistan, Maoist, but honestly, I don't know if there are very many of them. But the ones that exist, I can imagine they want economic development, and they were hoping that that China and Russia can bring in economic development. And I mean, I would imagine, but I haven't talked to any Afghan communists. All right. On that note, why don't we do the roll call, and then after we do the roll call, then I'll keep answering super chat questions. So let's do the roll call. Who's with us? Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. Lucha from Mississippi. Nadia from East Harlem. Detroit. Adelaide, Australia. All right. David in China. Montreal. Chaya, welcome. Ash in Chicago. Wisconsin. Jeff in Studio City. Kieran from San Diego. Milos from from Poland. Zach from Seattle. Clydebank. Io in New York. Welcome, Io. Great. Auckland, New Zealand. Good friend of the show, Io. Jamie Gray is Jamie from Dallas, Texas. John in Houston. 70th anniversary of Tibet liberation. Very good. Thank you for the super chat. John in Houston. Ripserwin, right? Mike in North Carolina. Springfield, Missouri. Denver. Joe in Chicago. Los Angeles. Tanner in Bolivar, Nate in Sydney, Anaheim, California, Gleb, Arturo in Alaska, Joey, Keaton, and Curvins in Jersey. Shout out to all of you folks. Good stuff. Hailing from Melbourne, right? Mary in West Virginia, Tamara and Dario from Brooklyn. Shout out to you guys. Great folks. Philip from St. Petersburg, Tucson, Danielle from Illinois, Joshua Tree, Kinky, Mo in Toronto, Canada, right? Joe in Philadelphia, Bobby in Austin, Texas, People's Republic of California, West Virginia, North Carolina, MPLS, Calgary, London, UK, Paragus, Los Angeles, Jared from the United Corporations of America, Memo from Ukiah, California, Sam from Australia. Good stuff, folks. Good stuff. Who else is with us? Good stuff. Anybody else? Mobile, Alabama, Nicholas Lynch is with us. Good stuff. All righty. Nate from Chicago, Sham, Cleveland, Wasteland. Welcome. All right. Kendall in San Diego, Florida, Kolkata, India. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. And we're just going to keep rolling here because that's what we do. We just keep rolling. I'm going to keep answering these super chat questions until the end of the night. So that's how we do it. All right. Trotsky on Stalin on social issues. Well, I think Trotsky understood that Stalin was compromising with social conservatism. There's a section in Trotsky's book called The Revolution Betrayed, where he talks about the thermidor in the family. And I guess, originally when the Soviet Union began, homosexuality was legalized, abortion was legalized. But as, Stalin came on into office, 1927, 1928, as the, things solidified, they were trying to increase the population, and there was kind of a wave of social conservatism, and they started kind of glorifying what they called the Soviet family, which was mom and dad and kids, but kind of a precursor to the nuclear family that we have in the United States. They outlawed abortion, they outlawed homosexuality. And that was very much, that was a compromise with the social conservatism of the old, very, very radical left-wing ideas. And the peasantry of Russia are some of the most, at that point, were some of the most conservative people in the world, right? Very, very deeply conservative and religious. So it was a compromise. And the Stalin government was very much a compromise. And that if you can interpret 20th century socialism as kind of a compromise between the deep conservatism of people in the developing world and the radical left-wing progressivism of the communists. And it was somewhere in between, right? There were aspects of the Soviet government that mimicked feudalism. You talk about having the single party leader whose face is everywhere, and is kind of, it's almost kind of the role of a king in a way, right? I mean, it's like the king is the symbol of the country that people get all emotional about, this fatherly figure who tells us what is right and wrong. But at the same time, the role of women in society greatly changed. Industrialization, education is brought to people. People are involved in the decisions of their workplace, a level of workplace democracy where workers actually get a say in running their workplaces throughout the Soviet Union. Empowerment of the population and, these workers, these councils on a local level that carry out the goals of the revolution. So it's a compromise. And socialism in the 20th century, that's in academia, they talk about real socialism. I think in German, it's all one word, real socialism. And then people talk about actually existing socialism, real existing socialism. I think people also talk about Stalinism. People who don't like it, they call it Stalinism. It was very much a compromise, right, between the deeply conservative positions of people in the developing world and the radical, far-left, liberal ideals of Western radicals and of the Marxist movement. And that it was a compromise. And Stalin, and you have to remember, who was Stalin? He was a guy who'd gone to seminary school to become a priest. He was from the country. He was from Georgia. He was kind of the linchpin of the Bolshevik Party between, the Lenin and Trotsky. There was these intellectuals from wealthy backgrounds and the average Bolshevik worker who was a labor unionist or a peasant or whatever. And Stalin was this educated guy from the countryside who was kind of the linchpin of it all. And that's how you can understand it. That's how you can understand Stalin and the role he played and what the economic system, what the political and economic model that dominated the Cold War, what people call actually existing socialism or Stalinism, what that model was. And that model was very, very, very effective at industrializing countries, at raising people out of poverty, etc. However, it kind of hits a wall at some point. I think it needed to be adjusted. So, ultimately, there's a lot we can learn from that. And we shouldn't deny the achievements of that system, but we should admit its shortcomings too, right? I mean, there's a great movie, very good movie, called Strawberry and Chocolate. It's a great movie from Cuba. And I actually saw this movie, and it's about an older gay man who becomes friends with like a Cuban teenager. And they just become friends. And the older gay man, he's not just gay, he's like an artist, an intellectual. He's a smart guy. And he's kind of a non-conforming intellectual who's gay. And he's friends with this young kid who's in the Young Communist League. And they have a lot of discussions about Cuban society. And at the end of the movie, he defects from Cuba. The old gay man leaves Cuba, and he leaves the country. And if you watch the movie, it came out in the 90s in Cuba, and it was very much the Cuban government admitting that model that they had adopted during the Cold War was not very nice to guys like the older guy in the movie. The hero of the movie is this older gay guy who's this intellectual, and that Cuban society wasn't very good to people like that. He's a non-conforming person. He's a free thinker. He's very smart, much smarter than most other people. And Cuban society, there was a kind of, here is my genuine support for different voices. Thank you, Jason. Cuban society and that Cold War model of really existing socialism, there's an element of conformity where they don't, people like that get punished and get isolated, and that's not good. And if you watch that movie, that's the Cuban government saying that was one of the problems. The time that the fall of the Soviet Union happened, it was, educated folks, doctors, lawyers, college professors, those kind of people felt a high level of alienation from the society, right? Instead of hijacking their talents, those people often got stifled and suppressed. And, it's a good movie. I would recommend watching Strawberry and Chocolate. And that's a movie made by a communist government, right? The Cuban government made that movie. But it's got a gay hero, and it basically acknowledges the mistakes and one of the weaknesses of really existing socialism in the Cold War, which was the way non-conforming individuals, sexual minorities, but also smart people, bookish people were treated. And there was a problem with that. And it's actually, watching that movie was very educational for me. I saw that, they had a Cuban film festival here in New York. And I saw that, and, it kind of, and that's what Deng Xiaoping, if you read Deng Xiaoping's writings, where he's talking about intellectuals and how they're being held back from making a greater contribution to Cuban society. He's talking about guys like that in the movie. You have to see the movie. It's an important movie, I would think. And the fact that the Cuban government made it meant at the top of the government they were having those kind of conversations. How do we keep the intellectuals and the nonconformists and the smart people on our side? How do we not make the mistake of marginalizing certain communities that could then, turn against the revolution? So there you go. Alrighty, enough about that. All right, was the Khalq faction of the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan ultra-left? My understanding is they were, right? It was led by, Amin, and that they did a lot that alienated the deeply religious peasantry of the country, and that, that they were, invoking Che Guevara and Mao, and they were much more radical, and the Soviet Union and their allies in Afghanistan basically argued that that they were ultimately alienating the People's Democratic Party from the population. I remember when I first read, there's a very important book on Afghanistan called Afghanistan, Washington's Secret War by Philip Banoski. And that book talks a lot about that faction and the factional fight within the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan. And when I first read it, I actually assumed the opposite. But now that now that I know more, I actually think that book is probably correct in its assessment. So there you go. What does equality mean? Well, that's actually a good question, right? What do you say to people who dismiss? I already said that, Nicholas. I just spent the whole. I just responded to that for a long time, right? I answered that. I answered that a little while back, and then I answered it again, and wow, I answered that question for sure, Nicholas. I definitely answered it. You need to roll back, because that was, I think, what was it? That was, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That was the 9th question I answered. So I answered that question. I answered that before. I said, I answered what... is the U.S. and Afghanistan just prepping for another war? I answered it after the question of, did you read all those books? So yes, that question has been answered, Nicholas. That's okay. That's all right. We're going on ahead. What does equality mean? I like that question. What does equality mean? Because equality is a word that through defining it, we can come to understand things. There is something called hierarchy that exists in human society. Hierarchy, which is some people having a dominant position over others, right? When you are a student in school, there is a hierarchy, and the hierarchy goes like this. The students are subservient to the teacher is subservient to the principal is subservient to the school board. That's the hierarchy. Right? And societies tend to, have hierarchies as well. Class society, right? In feudalism, the king was the highest up in the hierarchy. Below that was the nobility. Below that was the military. And below that was the peasantry. And what's different about capitalism is that the hierarchies in capitalist society are all based on private property and wealth. They're not sanctified by some religion. Right? We don't all grow up learning that, Bill Gates was betrothed to the throne by God to rule, and he was anointed king of Microsoft to rule upon us, and it is our duty to work for Bill Gates. No, this is that Bill Gates started a company, he's got the money, and the hierarchies of capitalism are very crass, right? But there are other forms of hierarchy. There's gender hierarchy, right? The patriarchal order, where men are considered, the head of the household, and the women are subservient to the men, and the father is domineering over the children. The patriarchal system, that is hierarchical, right? And that human beings do form hierarchies, right? And that hunter-gatherer civilization, there was a little bit of a hierarchy, right? In hunter-gatherer civilization in early human history, where you have tribes of 20 or 30, there would be leaders of the tribe. There would be kind of a pecking order in the tribe to some degree or other, but nobody was exploiting everyone else. There were no classes, and everyone was pretty much equal for the most part, even though there was some kind of hierarchy. But as class society emerged, more complex hierarchies developed, the emergence of slavery, feudalism, and our modern system is very hierarchical, except the hierarchy is naked. It is a naked hierarchy, right? Of just whoever has the most money rules, right? They've got the most money, they rule. And it's not sacred. It's not blessed by anything. There's no sacred mythology around it. And the basis of hierarchy is scarcity. When there is not enough to go around, people hoard. And some people get, and some people don't, right? And social hierarchies are rooted in scarcity. Inequality, which is the nature of hierarchies and inequalities, are rooted in scarcity. The more abundance that develops, the more equality can exist, and the less hierarchies and inequalities you have. A great example of this, right? Great example of this. In working class life, the life of low-income people, there is a lot more hierarchical practices, right? Some of these schools that rich kids go to, they don't have to ask permission to go to the bathroom. Did you know this? At some of these wealthier schools, the child has to go to the bathroom. He gets up, he walks out of the door, he pees, he comes back. Some of these schools, the students can just get up and have personal time and walk out. You know that? Try to go to a working class school and do that. Go to a school in a low-income African-American neighborhood in an urban area, or a low-income rural area, in West Virginia or Kentucky. Forget it, right? That there are much more hierarchical authoritarian practices in working class areas. And working class people tend to have been in the military. The military is a much bigger part of working class life than it is out of middle class people's lives. Furthermore, prison, people having been in prison, right? Prisons are pretty hierarchical places. There's a lot of rigid authoritarian practices in prison. You think the prisoners can just do whatever they want? No. You think, the prisoners aren't constantly being put down and reminded, having guards assert their dominance over them in a very kind of cruel, barbaric hierarchy? You bet, right? And that, even in our current society, in areas where there's more prosperity, there is less of these hierarchical practices. There's less authoritarianism than in areas when there's not. Where you have low-income people, you tend to have very authoritarian practices. Where you have wealthier folks, people are just kind of allowed to do what they want. And that, in and of itself, is an expression of what I'm describing on a society-wide basis, which is that eradicating hierarchy, eradicating authoritarianism, and eradicating inequality is rooted really in eradicating scarcity. When there's enough to go around, when people are prosperous, when they're not struggling to get by, when, then hierarchies tend to fade away. However, when people are struggling to survive, when there's not enough to go around, hierarchies become more rigid and authoritarian and assertive, right? And that the road to eradicating inequality is eradicating scarcity. And that is an essential understanding of Marxism. Marxism, we don't want everyone to be poor and equal. That is not what Marxism believes. Marxism rather espouses the idea that with rational control of the means of production and society, having rational planning of the economy, controlling the means of production, we can build up enough abundance that hierarchies and inequality can fade away, right? And there you go. That's a long answer to what should have been a short thing, but whatever, it was an important thing. Internal passports in the USSR. I've heard about this, and I've heard people critique it, and I've heard different things about it. The main thing is you have to remember the Soviet Union was surrounded. It was never given a moment of peace. It was under attack. It was fighting for its life, and it achieved real economic miracles in spite of that. However, because it was under attack, because it was surrounded, because it was barricaded, because it was constantly at war and facing the threat of annihilation from the West, because 15 countries invaded after the Bolshevik Revolution, because World War II came in and they lost 27 million people, because of the fact that there was blockades and they weren't allowed to, there was NATO treaties that prevented them from getting technology. Because of all of that, right, the Soviet Union wasn't able to be a free and open society that you would want it to be. right? It was very much a society that was was damaged from the time it came into existence and was forced to adopt very, very authoritarian methods. And, you're describing something, and I don't know the specifics of that policy, but that kind of thing, it's not because the Bolsheviks wanted it, because they were just mean people who just thought, oh, we want to implement this. No, it's a result of their conditions. What I take from the Soviet Union is that they raised millions out of poverty, they invented space travel, they defeated the Nazis, they eliminated illiteracy. They did all of that despite being in such horrific conditions. And that shows that we don't have to have capitalism. That's what we can learn from the Soviet experience. As far as copying it, as far as trying to idealize it and make it the most pure thing, I don't go there. I don't, because, the hardship that those societies were in, there you go. Someone said the progressive tradition in the American heartland wears suits. I don't know what they're getting at. But yes, there are millions of people across the United States who are ready for socialism. They are ready to hear a socialist message. And it's time to give it to them. It's time to get it to them out of the movement to the masses. Gaddafi was very sympathetic to the USSR. At one point in the 1980s, Gaddafi even wanted to join the Warsaw Pact. Gaddafi's Libya was very much modeled on the Soviet Union. It did not espouse Marxism. It was Islamic socialism or Kibism, the Green Book, rather than Marxism. But the Soviet Union aligned with them, joint projects. The Soviet Union sold them weapons. The Soviet Union was very close to the USSR. There was a period in the late 70s where Gaddafi supported in Afghanistan, for example. He supported the Mujahideen of Afghanistan. Gaddafi, there were some shifts. There were times that Gaddafi was less pro-Soviet, but at some points he was very, very pro-Soviet, and he overall was sympathetic to the Soviet Union. But it wasn't a perfect situation. Sometimes there were differences. All right. The petrodollar. And is that why the result of the Cold War? That was a big factor, right? The petrodollar that the countries outside of the communist economy of the Eastern Bloc, that you could only buy oil in dollars. That had a lot to do with it, right? And that there was the situation where in West Germany you had the Green Party, and you had a situation in West Germany where they were going to buy oil from the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union spent a huge amount of money to build a pipeline into West Germany, and then the USA dropped the oil prices with the Saudis and dropped the oil prices. Michael Reagan, the son of Ronald Reagan, brags about this and how that hurt the Soviet economy very significantly. There's a lot there. Yes, oil is a very important part of, especially now, of Russia's economy. The petrodollar and the kind of the domination of the oil markets by the United States, that's a real factor. And our economy today runs on oil, right? And oil, if you look at, we've got 4 super major oil companies: Chevron, BP, Shell, and ExxonMobil. If you throw in Total, which is the Francis Corporation, Total, that there is 80% of the world's oil production. 80%, right? You want to talk about a monopoly. That's 5 corporations that have 80% of the market. That is an ultra monopoly. And the fact that oil, if you drive a car, that's oil. You fly a plane, that's oil. Anything plastic, the plastic in this pen, that's oil. The fact that our whole economy is centered around oil, and oil is dominated by these ultra monopolies, that has a lot to do with our global situation. We need to get out of an oil-based economy. And the imperialists, the reason that they're in this Malthusian overdrive is that the oil-based economy cannot continue. We have to get beyond that. We have to interact with our environment differently as a species. So there you go. All right. Neocons on Fox are crying about Afghanistan. Will we go back in 2024? No. No, we won't. The neocons, see, this is perfect. Right now, they're playing up Taliban atrocities. They want to get in people's heads. This is what happens when we don't intervene, right? The neocons, they have this belief that the USA intervenes in order to just help people. The Pentagon is this charity group, and it just goes around the world helping people. Saddam Hussein is oppressing people, so Mr. American Freedom flies in, I'll save you, innocent people, and rescues them. And then, Gaddafi is killing people, and so the Pentagon, flies in, I'll save you, dun, 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 dun. It's this stupid narrative. And it blows my mind that people are so stupid to believe this, because it's just dumb. It's not true, but people really did believe this. Many people insisted the reason we invaded Iraq, Caleb, is to help the people there. They're being brutal, oppressed by a dictator. We're providing them with freedom. People really believe this garbage, but that's the narrative these people have. And so now the USA is pulling out, and there's allegedly some atrocities being committed by the Taliban. Taliban aren't nice folks. It wouldn't surprise me if they're doing some nasty stuff. And so because of that, the narrative is this is what happens. Oh, all you anti-war people, this is what you wanted, right? Oh, you oppose interventions? Well, look what happens. As if people haven't been dying in Afghanistan for 20 years. As if people haven't been fleeing for their lives and getting blown up. I mean, give me a break. But anyway, okay. All right. Future U.S. foreign policy post-Afghanistan. Well, as I said before, I think they're going to shift focus to Latin America and Asia. I think that they have unified on China. China it seemed like Trump was pushing the idea that we should hate China. Democrats were saying, well, maybe China's not so bad, we should hate Russia. Now it seems like both sides, both sides have agreed that China is the main enemy. That seems to be the big shift that came with the pandemic. So China demonization will be big, but also I expect they're going to go for Latin America some more because, the so-called pink tide is not over. It's continuing with Pedro Castillo in Peru, etc. Intelligence misled Biden. Yeah, I think, you look at Biden, they didn't know what was coming. They were completely blown away. As much as they did hand over the country to them, they didn't expect them to get rolled over that quickly. They're in shock about what's happening. They weren't prepared for this, and they look kind of foolish. So, yeah, it's very possible that bad intelligence was handed over, because this is, there you go. Zhuganov, the leader of the Russian Communist Party, said that the USSR should learn from China. Again, I agree that China was able to adjust its socialist system to be more effective and lasting, but the reason the USSR didn't change that way is not simply because they didn't listen to China, okay? I think that the reason that the USSR became entrenched for a reason, and thank you, Gleb, for the super chat. I really appreciate it. The way the USSR was, the entrenched nature of the Soviet system, the way it became was the result of big problems in Soviet society that had a lot to do with being barricaded. The Soviet Union became very rigid. It wasn't capable of really reforming. Gorbachev tried to reform it, and in the process of trying to reform it, the whole thing came apart. Right? You need to have a system that's not so set in stone. The Chinese Communist Party is constantly changing, adapting, and evolving, and that's what has made it effective. All right. So the thing about this Nathan Robinson guy who wrote Why You Should Be a Socialist, firing his staff. The staff wanted to unionize, wanted to make the company into a worker cooperative, and he fired them all. Well, that's shitty. Look, at the end of the day, a lot of these people that are promoting socialism are fake, are very, very fake. Jabba the Vosh, Skippy the Bear, ContraPoints, a lot of these people are fake. But, look, I don't want to jump on this thing with Robinson and be like, hypocrite, phony. I don't want to do that, okay? I just don't, because it's like, okay, all right. Maybe this guy should learn what socialism actually means, and that socialism isn't just every company is a worker cooperative. Maybe this guy should treat his employees well enough that they don't feel like they want to restructure the entire company because he's such a dick. Maybe this guy, I don't know. Okay. Sounds like this guy had a fight with his staff. That happens. Employers do have fights with their staffs. And he is in the position of power, being the owner of the company. And they are in the position of not being very powerful as the employees. And supposedly his ideology was supposed to address that. And it appears he didn't want that to be addressed. But, there could be more details about this we don't know. Okay? All right. On the surface of it, I see what other people are saying. Okay, I hear you. Sounds like this guy's in the wrong. Sounds like he's revealing himself to be a hypocrite. But, there are always more details than this. I've had so many people take things I've said out of context, say things about my own life that are half true, that are like I don't want to just get on the internet. I'm just not comfortable getting on the internet and just being like, aha, got him, phony. I'm just not comfortable doing that because, again, I've had so many people do that to me, and it be BS. I'm not willing to do that to other people. I want to, go, okay, this happened, all right, but we're way too excited to do that. I want there to be a guy like Nathan Robinson who I could work with. Instead of, I'm more interested in somebody like Nathan Robinson coming along who's open to hearing an anti-imperialist and genuine socialist message than I am, hearing about a guy named Nathan Robinson who I can shout, phony! Okay, that's great. Well, there's a lot of phonies out there, and, he's not that person, clearly, right? But I wish he was. I don't want him to fail. I want him to be better. And that's my message to all of you. If you're watching this and you're a socialist, if you're another socialist commentator, another socialist writer, a socialist activist, I don't want you to fail. I want you to be better. I want you to be better, and I would like eventually for you to be able to work with me. That's my attitude. I'm not in this to prove that I'm the best socialist ever and you all are fakes because I'm not doing that, right? I'm doing my own thing. I'm setting up a think tank. I'm trying to promote socialism in my own way, but I want to work with people, right? Leslie Feinberg. Do folks know who Leslie Feinberg was? Leslie Feinberg was the first openly trans activist in U.S. history. I didn't know her intimately, but she did mentor me a little bit. I was able to talk to her. And the first time I ever met Leslie Feinberg was in Cleveland. She came to Cleveland to speak at a university about LGBT rights, and because I was in the political party that she was a member of, she had a special reception afterwards, and I had just met her. And I asked her, I said, what about all the people around the world that are communists, that are anti-LGBT? That's what I asked her, right? And I figured that she would denounce them because she was this trans activist, and she was, yeah. And this is what Leslie Feinberg said to me. I remember this, and again, I don't agree with everything she ever said, and she probably would hate a lot of things that I say on here, but this is what Leslie Feinberg said to me. And I was my jaw dropped because I was not expecting this answer. She said when she used to work in a factory and there was a machine part that was broken, they didn't just throw the whole machine away. You get your screwdriver and you fix it. Right? And she said there's a lot of people in the movement that have problematic issues on this or that question. But she doesn't just throw them out. She tries to fix them. That was a very insightful way of putting things, right? And actually, the funny thing was, shortly afterwards, a couple years after Leslie Feinberg, before I met Leslie Feinberg, a couple years after I met Leslie Feinberg, she stopped being publicly active, right? She had Lyme disease very badly. She was ill, and ultimately, after about a decade, she died. But she was still active at that point. But if you watched any speech she gave, she would be invited to these universities to speak about LGBT rights. They'd invite her there to speak on LGBT rights, and she would get there, and her whole speech would be about why LGBT people should support Cuba, why LGBT people should support Iran, why LGBT people should support North Korea. What was she doing? She knew that her draw was her writing on the trans issue. And she knew that was her draw. And she knew that her movement, the LGBT rights movement, was largely being co-opted to serve imperialism. So anytime she got a podium, she used her podium to just hammer home that if you really believe in LGBT rights, you must be an anti-imperialist. What was she doing? She was trying to, fix her movement. She saw that the LGBT rights movement had been, it was largely being co-opted to serve imperialism, and she was an ardent anti-imperialist, right? So, I think about that, and it's like, I don't want you to suck, okay? Right? Do you have a favorite country? I'm going to write that down. I'm not sure how I'm going to answer that. That's a weird question. Favorite country. All right. But, I don't want you to suck. I'm not going out of my way to find ways for you to suck so I can be like, I'm a better communist than you. No, I want you to be better. And I want you to be so good that you and I could work together and produce something even better. That's what I would like to do. I need other people to work with. And I just don't, our movement, one of the signs that the communist movement in the United States is not serious, and I keep hammering this point home, and I've said it on Twitter, and I've said it earlier tonight, one of the signs that our movement isn't serious is that it's a big ego trip competition, people fighting for the spotlight. I'm the best one. No, I'm the best one. I'm the best, you know. It's a big problem. I think I was starting to say this before I took the 5-minute break. Every leftist group I've always been in, I never want to hear anyone go, now if you hear me clap once, now if you hear me clap twice, now if you hear me clap 3 times, all right, so now we're all going to sit in a circle and we're going to talk about our favorite pizza. And we're going to share our experiences. It's going to be so fun. I hate this. I hate movement managing. The preschool politics. I hate it. I hate it. I absolutely hate it. I hate it. My favorite country singer. All right. I absolutely hate that movement managing stuff. And in every communist group, I don't know how it is. Every communist group, you find all these people. You find these people who don't believe in communism, that are just really good activists who somehow maneuver into being in charge of the group, and they don't believe in communism, and they think that something's wrong with you if you actually believe in communism, right? If they're having a group discussion and you like quote Marx or something, they'll be like, "Wow, sir, I can really see that you really have studied a lot. Well, we're real activists here." Okay, so, you know, it's great that you like know stuff, but we're trying to build a community movement. I mean, it's like this arrogant, I don't know what, these people are obnoxious human beings, and they don't believe in communism. They don't believe in communism, and they're not interested. They don't want to learn about communism. They're NGO-socialists, they're movement managers, and they are obnoxious, and they're gossipy. They make fun of people. They smear other people. It's their gig somehow. I don't know how it's their gig, right? They somehow maneuvered into getting paid to do this. And they treat the people who actually believe in communism like they're lunatics, right? I mean, the one that I always heard is you must be autistic. If you've ever read a book on communism, you must be autistic, I think this person must be on the spectrum because they're quoting some book called What Is to Be Done. I've never heard of that book. It was printed like 100 years ago. Oh my God. It's like these kind of people, I just cannot stand them. I cannot stand them. These are obnoxious people, right? I never want to be in an organization where I have to work around these kinds of people ever again. They drive me up the wall. I cannot stand them. They are obnoxious, okay? They're not communists. They're not socialists. I don't know. They're kindergarten teachers. They're, I don't know what they are. But they're obnoxious people. I never will ever make the mistake of joining an organization where I have to kiss one of these people's ass ever again, okay? Never. You should be on Fargo. I don't know what Fargo is. I see many Americans blame poor immigrants for the countries. How do we wake up in there? Oh, very good. All right. Blaming immigrants. How do we wake up? These folks are so obnoxious. They are just so obnoxious, and they seem to have weaseled their way into like anything that you go to that's like socialist. There's going to be one of these kindergarten teachers who's in charge of it, and they're gossipy and they're rude and they don't believe in communism, and they think that anyone who does believe in communism is a weird autistic white male or something, and I don't like these people. I do not like these people. And that's why I formed Center for Political Innovation. I didn't realize this. I was thinking about this today. Part of the reason I formed Center for Political Innovation is never will one of those be in charge of it. Never. Never, 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 never will the Center for Political Innovation have one of these people in charge of it. I will never allow it, right? Over my dead body, right? And the CPI is an independent think tank, not a party. If you want to join a party that's run by one of these people, have at it. If you want to do what I did, for 8 years I was in a group that was dominated by these kind of people. I'm not stopping you. I'm not trying to overthrow those parties. I'm not trying to maneuver and rob any of these people of their paychecks or what. I don't care. I'm just doing my own thing. All right? And I will never work in an organization. I will never put myself in a situation where I have to maneuver with or negotiate or compromise with one of these people. Because as much as I want to work with people, if you're a socialist and you believe in this stuff and I want to work with you and all that, but I'm never going to get myself in a situation where I have to deal with these people. I'm a communist because I believe in this stuff, okay? I believe in this stuff. I actually believe in this stuff. I've studied this stuff, and if you understand what we're talking about on here, if you've read books like this, if you know who Lenin was, if you know who Bukharin was, if you know who Trotsky and Stalin were, if you understand the theory of the permanent revolution, if you understand Marxism-Leninism, if you understand the difference between Deng Xiaoping theory and regular Mao Zedong thought, there's nothing wrong with you, okay? And I want you to feel at home in a group, and we need people explaining these ideas. There needs to be a wider understanding of these ideas in our culture. So, no, I'm never, 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 never am I ever going to collaborate and work under one of these kindergarten communists. I can't stand kindergarten communism. I'm not interested in it, you know. I'm sorry. You know, a lot of working class people get degraded in their everyday life. This kind of gets back to the hierarchy thing. Right? There's a lot of, again, if you go to one of these elite schools, right, where you can get up and go to the bathroom anytime you want, you don't need a hall pass, and you have a very comfortable existence. Okay, good for you. But there's a lot of working class people who do get degraded in their everyday life, who have suffered, humiliation, who get treated badly on the job, they get treated badly by their boss on the job. They're in a situation, and those kind of folks, right? Those kind of folks, they come to this movement because they want to be stronger. They don't want to be weak. They don't want to have group therapy. They want to be stronger. They want to feel powerful. And they want to rally around leadership that will make them feel more powerful. They want to be emboldened. They want to be able to stand strong and stand tall and feel like they're not getting kicked around. They want to feel like their grievances are being heard, like they're being taken care of, they're being addressed, right? They want to rally behind leadership that will offer that. And this kindergarten communism stuff, this is a middle class, it's a bunch of middle class wankery, and I'm done with it. Really, I'm done with it. The real broad masses of people in the United States, they hate this stuff, right? The broad masses of people around the world, they hate this stuff. This is middle-class NGO bullshit, okay? And I'm sick of it. It has nothing to do with communism, okay? I don't know what it is. They want to go to college to learn all about, what is it? It's like, just use the Marxist words, folks. Just use the Marxist words, right? The Marxist words are solidarity, uniting the struggle, right? The struggle of women for their liberation, the struggle of oppressed nationalities for their liberation, the struggle of workers for their liberation. Stand together. Solidarity, right? The different causes are connected, right? The system of oppression is to blame, right? This is just Marxism 101. We can't call it that. We can't call it solidarity. We can't call it uniting the struggle. It's intersectionality. Intersectionality. Oh, okay. I'm so sorry. I didn't know the word intersectionality. And what else? We can't talk about how racism hurts all workers, right? And how it's, and it's a tool of the bosses, and by stigmatizing one section of the working class and making them suffer the most on account of their race, it hurts all working people. No. Instead, we have to talk about white privilege. Well, I think it's not white privilege so much as it's violations of the rights of black people. What happens to black people for being black should not happen to anyone. Nobody should get shot for reaching for their wallet. Nobody should be denied a job that they are entitled to because of their skin color. Nobody should be economically destitute, and face adversity in their life because of their race. Nobody should. And the fact that black people face that in the United States, which they do, they overwhelmingly do, and anyone who tries to tell you that's not true is an idiot, that is a violation of their rights. And by violating the rights of one section of the working class, you can violate the rights of all. When you oppress one person, you oppress all of society. By stigmatizing one group, you can bring everybody down. But by putting the needs of that most oppressed group in the front, you can raise everybody up. This is Marxism. They don't want to have that conversation. No, it's white privilege. And we're going to sit around and we're going to have this group therapy conversation where we feel guilty and we talk about how we've had it too good, and then we cancel people who aren't as woke as we are because they haven't been through this guilt training that we've been through. And sorry, this stuff isn't Marxism. This stuff is toxic, right? And it's very middle class. Go to a working class person who's living in a trailer, who's got one of their parents in jail, and go to them and say, oh, your life is too good. You have some white privilege. Well, no, their life would be worse if they were black, no question about it. No one denies that. But don't go to, a working class person who's just gotten kicked off of food stamps and their brother's in jail for opioids. Don't go to a working class person who just got out of the military fighting in Iraq or Afghanistan and they've got PTSD and they're afraid to get up in the morning. Don't go to them and tell them their life is too good. Don't go to them and say that. It's not going to work, right? It's true that hardship that they experienced would be worse if they were black. That's true, okay? And I'm not trivializing that and I'm not denying that. But don't go to, don't go to a working class person whose neighborhood, the roads are crumbling and falling apart and, the factories have closed down. Don't go to them. I've never heard HR use the word solidarity, but I have seen them use actionality. Exactly, the bosses. I mean, the employers love this stuff, right? Don't go to somebody who's suffering and happens to be white or happens to be male and tell them they have privilege and that their life is too good, because what you're essentially telling them is that they deserve to have it worse off. And I'm sorry, if you're having hardship in your life and somebody comes up to you and says, you deserve to be worse off, what's the response going to be? F you. That's what most people would say. If you are having a hard time, you're down on your luck, you're having trouble paying your bills, you're dealing with family crises, and somebody comes along and says, you actually have it too good, you've got a privilege, most people are going to respond by going, F you. What do you mean I have it too good? I'm dealing with this and that. And that is not the communist approach. The communist approach to the race question is that by putting the needs of black people first, by putting the struggle against racism first, all workers can advance. Gene Sharp, I don't know much about Gene. I really don't know anything about Gene Sharp, Olympia. That was somebody else super chatted me that. I just don't know much about him. I'll have to do some research. By putting the needs of the most oppressed first, by putting, that's why the Communist Party USA gave such priority to the black question and the oppression of black people. That's why they promoted Langston Hughes. That's why they promoted Paul Robeson. That's why they talked about the black belt thesis, right? That is a huge part. But the understanding was that by putting the needs of the nationally oppressed and the colonized people first, all workers can advance. That is the communist understanding. It's called solidarity. It's not called privilege. It's not called intersectionality. It's not called sensitivity training. It's called solidarity. It's a class struggle message, right? That racism hurts all workers, most especially those who are the victims of it. But it hurts all workers and it hurts all of society. that by eradicating social hierarchies, by eradicating inequalities, by fighting for the equality of marginalized groups, by putting their needs at the front of the struggle, you can advance the entire working class. This is pretty basic stuff. But this, kindergarten communism, NGO-cialism has obscured it. And I don't like it. I don't like it one bit. And I don't want to, I'm tired of maneuvering around these people. What they believe is not Marxism, and I'm teaching Marxism here. That's what I teach on these lives. The economics of Marxism, actual Marxism. How did we get from Nathan Robinson to that? I don't know. Sometimes I get rambly. It's late at night. Whatever. I'm having a good time. All right, the PKI of Indonesia. The Communist Party of Indonesia, they were aligned with the president of Indonesia, who was kind of a Bonapartist, who was moving towards socialism, Sukarno. And in 1965, the CIA overthrew the government of Indonesia. And it was a coup. The military overthrew the Indonesian government and slaughtered the Communist Party of Indonesia, the PKI. And it went from being a massacre of communists, where the CIA was providing the Indonesian military with the names of communists, it went from there to actually being a genocide against ethnically Chinese people. Because in Indonesia, there are different ethnicities. The ethnicity of, ethnic Chinese people in Indonesia were heavily represented in the Communist Party, and they were slaughtered. And there was about 500,000 of them who died. 500,000 people were killed in Indonesia, 1965. It's a horrendous crime against humanity, one of the biggest genocides and mass murders. And Barack Obama's father was tied into it. His stepfather, Barack Obama's stepfather, Obama's mother, Ann Dunham, she married a guy who was high up in the Indonesian military who participated in these massacres. That's a little known fact. And that Obama spent a lot of his childhood in Indonesia because of the fact that his mother, Ann Dunham, who was this academic who worked with the Ford Foundation, she was married to this military guy who seemed to be connected to some of these mass killings. So put that in your pipe and smoke it. That's pretty weird. But yeah, it's a horrific thing, and nobody knows anything about it. So there you go. Well, I think a lot of people in Indonesia know about it, but very few people here in the United States know about it. All right. Euromaidan. Euromaidan was in 2014. There was a protest movement in Ukraine that was fomented. A lot of Western NGOs paid for it and funded it, gave it support. The U.S. Embassy was supporting it. It was a protest movement to get Ukraine to join the European Union. It ultimately resulted in the overthrow of the elected president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, and the installing of the current government in Ukraine, which is much more fanatically anti-Russian. That's Euromaidan. And it was an escalation against Russia. And in that situation, Crimea separated from Ukraine and voted to join with Russia. And in that situation, the Eastern republics, the Donbass, they declared they want autonomy, and there's the agreement, the Minsk agreement, and the whole situation in Ukraine. Basically, the United States staged one of these fake color revolutions to destabilize Ukraine and to polarize the country, and it worked. And ever since then, the country's been divided, and there's been confusion, and there you go. All right, Eastern Europe. Will it recover from the collapse of the USSR? Well, I mean, some countries have, Poland is doing much better than it used to be, right? Poland was doing very, very badly in the 90s, but Poland has recovered to some degree or other. But there are some countries that are still just devastated. I mean, Romania, forget it, right? Latvia, Lithuania, countries like that are just devastated. But there's some countries that have made some progress. There you go. I think the part of the reason, never mind. Anyway, next question. Who's my favorite country singer? I like the Statler brothers, those four guys who do that, like, singing quartet, they do country music. I like the Statler brothers. They're pretty good. I'm not a huge country music fan, honestly, but I know more about it than most people, in New York City at least. But yeah, the Statler brothers, I would say, in terms of country Western music. I'm more of a folk music kind of guy. That's kind of where I come from, is folk music. But, there's some country music I like. All right. All right. Oh, favorite country. My favorite country. I don't have a favorite country, right? As an internationalist, I think that every country is worthy of respect. I do not rate countries in terms of hierarchy. I've always been annoyed in the United States. There's this thing people say where they say, this is the greatest country in the world. And that's always annoyed me. It's a really arrogant, rude statement. It's extremely rude, right? You're going around, my country is better than your country. It's a really rude, and no one can ever tell you what it's based on, right? How is the United States the greatest of all the greatest country in the world? How is it the greatest country in the world? How? Well, it is. And if you don't think that, you must be brainwashed, right? Because clearly, anybody who doesn't think the United States is the greatest country in the world must be brainwashed. So I mean, it's just, yeah, I hate that. National chauvinism is something to be opposed. I am a patriotic American. I want what is good for this country. I want this country to be economically prosperous. I want this country to have life improving. But as a patriot, I am an internationalist because I know the only way things can get better for the United States is if imperialism is dismantled, if capitalism is abolished, if we can get beyond the system of profits in command. All right, blues. Wow, this is a weird night. That's okay. Blues. All right. If we can get beyond the system of profits and command, that is the only, that is the only way we can get beyond it. So, if that, I'm patriotic in the sense that I want a good life for the United States, but in order to be patriotic, I have to be an internationalist. Mao Zedong says there is no contradiction between patriotism and internationalism. And I would agree with that. There is no contradiction between patriotism and internationalism, right? To be truly patriotic, you have to be an internationalist. You can't be a chauvinist. You can't be an imperialist to be patriotic, right? That hurts the country, number one. Number two, in order to be an internationalist, you can't want bad things for the place that you live, right? You want things there to get better along with the rest of the world. So they go together. Blaming immigrants. How do we wake people up? Well, look, the right wing is awful, right? I mean, they play up stereotypes. They're rapists, they're murderers. I'm going to build a big giant wall, everybody. Big giant wall. It's just pandering to people's bigotry, othering, anti-immigrant bigotry, and especially the policies being promoted by the Republican Party, the ICE raids, all of that that helps the anti-immigrant gangs. That helps drive down the wages. They're concerned about driving the wage. The more you make immigrant, communities afraid, the more you drive them into the shadows, the more you make immigrant children afraid their parents might not be there when they get home from school. The more you terrorize immigrant communities, the more you do that, the stronger terrorists and criminal gangs like MS-13 are going to become. You make immigrant communities afraid to call the police. You make people afraid to operate in the above-ground economy. That's, first of all, it's going to drive wages down because, the law in the United States is you have to pay minimum wage to all workers. Doesn't matter if they're documented or not. Did you know that? Right? It is illegal to pay an undocumented immigrant less than minimum wage. Doesn't matter, right? You can't pay a worker less than minimum wage. Doesn't matter if they're documented, okay? But if immigrants are afraid, they're not going to speak up. They're not, so by making immigrants terrified, by having ICE raids on the communities, by making people terrified and operating in the shadows and scared, by doing that, you're going to, make it easier for employers to pay them low wages and exploit them, right? So it's like all these things Republicans say they're doing because, immigration drives wages down, immigration brings in drugs, all these things they do make things worse. They're strengthening the MS-13 group, by building a big giant wall, people smuggling across the border, make it harder to cross the border. Well, people are going to have to get someone to help them across, aren't they? And that's going to be a criminal gang. So all the things Republicans are doing, actually make all the things they're complaining about immigration worse. Meanwhile, what do Democrats offer? Democrats offer this kind of, oh, I'm with you. I'm so sorry. I care about you. But they do the same shit, right? We don't have kids in cages at the border anymore. No, we have children in facilities. It's so much better, isn't it? Children in facilities, so much better than kids in cages. That's what's going on here. And it's like the Democrats, they talk a nicer game, but they don't have any real answers. They don't have any real answers. And at the end of the day, there is an issue. And the issue is that people can't stay in their country because of neoliberalism and capitalism, driving wages down, grinding countries into poverty. I said in my opening remarks that the answer to this is that we absolutely need the Sandino-Zapata economic corridor. Right? We need economic development, an emergency crash program of economic development of Mexico and El Salvador and Guatemala and Honduras. What would you say to young people struggling with self-esteem and mental issues? All right, putting that on the list, right? All right, self-esteem, mental issues. All right, so blues. I don't know. Is Lou Reed kind of a blues singer? I really like Lou Reed's song, I'm Waiting for My Man, right? There's something about that song I just like, right? I'm waiting for my man, $26 in my hand. Good stuff. But yeah, blues is not particularly the style of music. I mean, I listened to Jimi Hendrix when I was in high school. I really liked, Purple Haze and The Wind Cries Mary and Voodoo Child, and I was into that kind of stuff for a while. But I try to start every day with classical music and end every day with classical music. Before I go to sleep, first thing I listen to when I wake up is classical music. Last thing I listen to before I go to bed is classical music. Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Haydn, But yeah, when I get through the day, what is it? There's that blues song. What is it? Janis Joplin, get it while you can. Yeah, I respect that stuff. All right. Self-esteem. What would I say to folks struggling with self-esteem issues? Well, first things first is that the problem is an economic one. Right? This capitalist economy has written millions of young people out of the economy. Right? There's not a place for you in the economy. There's not a place for you at the assembly line. The capitalists have made technology increase. And as a result, there's not a place for you. And they want to blame you. They want to make it sound like you're just not good enough. And that seems to be the message of so much of the media these days, right? You turn on the TV, you turn on your social media, it's all just, you suck, you're not good enough, you're not good enough, you are not good enough. That's just there's just a steady chorus coming out of everything. You're not good enough, you're not good enough. And it's just being drummed into people's heads. And so many young people really take that to heart, right? And they look at the fact that they're being deprived of the dignity of adulthood. They're not going to get a good paying job that gets, they're not going to be able to go get a house and get married and have a normal life, have the normal kind of life that Americans used to have. And they're struggling to get by. And then our culture has become so crass and, where everything is valued by how much money you have. And so at the same time, our culture has gotten so crass, at the same time, economic opportunities have faded away. And so you have this crisis of mental health for a lot of young Americans. Absolutely. And I would say to those folks, the best thing you can do is get involved in a socialist movement, right? That is how you can make yourself a better person. Get involved in a movement to build socialism, right? I would encourage you to get involved with the Center for Political Innovation. Look, I hope they're still watching. It might be late. They might have already gone to bed. But the John Brown Volunteers, these are great people, One of them from Pennsylvania, he watched these streams. He was just like you watching these streams. And he said, you know what? I want to be part of this. Came to my retreat in Pennsylvania, came with me to New York City. And, there's another guy from Illinois, again, watches these streams, involved with different communist groups. He heard what we're saying here. Graduated from high school, packed up everything, came to New York City. And they are out there struggling. They're out there every day doing outreach on the street. They have decided that their response to the failure of capitalism and the system not having a place for them, they've decided that their response is to take up history's challenge and to become a gravedigger of capitalism. To go out into the streets and live a life dedicated to socialist revolution, right? To spreading the revolutionary message and to building the Center for Political Innovation. They've decided, and that's, I made that decision. I got into communism when I was in college, and one thing and another thing, and I was out of college, and I remember I was quite frustrated because I was ready to give my life to this. And the socialist group I was in, they were retired. They were old. They were just kind of like, yeah, just go have a normal life. And I was like, no, I want to give my life to this. And I have largely given my life to this, right? I'm a fanatic. I am definitely a fanatic. I am a fanatical socialist. I am a fanatical revolutionary. Absolutely. And I want you to be one too. The day you stop being a fanatic is the day of your spiritual death. The day that you have nothing to die for is the day you stop living, right? Choose the life that matters. Dedicate your life to the struggle for a socialist society, right? I'm not a mental health expert. This isn't psychological or mental health advice. This is just I'm speaking from my own experience. There's an old communist I once knew, and he said, Caleb, being a communist, it doesn't get much better than this. Doesn't get much better than this. He was right. He was absolutely right. It doesn't get much better than this. Choose a life that matters. Choose a life of struggle. Be able to look yourself in the mirror and say, I made a contribution to humanity. I'm helping bring down this system. Have comrades, people you're in the trenches with, struggling alongside, who got your back. Join a community of solidarity. Join a socialist movement. That's what I would say to them, right? And the problem with Jordan Peterson's advice, the problem with it is that Jordan Peterson's advice is largely individualist. It blames individuals, and there's a whole lot of othering people. I've seen various clips of Jordan Peterson over the years. I've seen him just say wildly inaccurate things about communism. One clip he says, Russia was a paradise. Tsarist Russia was a paradise compared to what the Bolsheviks did. It's like Tsarist Russia didn't have running water and electricity. Tsarist Russia, was mass illiterate. How can he say that? But, because I read Solzhenitsyn, it's true. And Jordan Peterson, another clip, he says, Hitler was elected by a huge majority. I've never had such a majority voted for Hitler. That's not true either, right? Hitler never got a majority in the election, right? The lobsters. He's such an idiot. But I figured in order to give the guy his due, I would watch an entire speech from beginning to end. And so I did. I watched an entire Jordan Peterson speech. And one thing that I noticed is a lot of the mental health stuff, look, it's just standard clinical psychology. It's not, it's not slanted to the right. It's just standard, how to feel good, what any psychologist would tell you. But along with it, there was a lot of othering of people. There was a lot of referring to people that do have mental health problems, have developmental disorders or whatever, referring to them as worthless, saying that deep down you're a lot more evil than you realize. There was a lot of trying to push people to be more contemptuous of humanity. Trying to push people to think of humans in a much more sinister way. That seemed to be the underlying message. Think of certain types of people as worthless. Think of certain types of people as just awful. Think of certain types of people as hopeless. Recognize that you yourself have a sinister, evil side. You're capable of doing evil, bad things. That seems to be a big part of what he preaches. He's trying to get people to hate each other. He's trying to get people to view their fellow man with contempt. And that I don't respect. He's not pushing an optimistic message. He's pushing kind of a dark, sinister one. And it's, the anti-communism is so lame. It's just, you listen to him talk, the way he talks about communism, this is just standard, lame. And if there were real communists who would debate him, like tankies, he wouldn't stand a chance. But because, he says, oh, everywhere communism's ever been, happened, it's killed a gajillion million people. And, the main voices representing communism are Vosh and Thought Slime and ContraPoints, and they agree with that. And so it's perfect. He can just say that, and there's no response to it. So there you go. But, but yeah, I don't know. I hope that answers your question, Cameron. And on that note, I think, it's almost 1 in the morning, so I'm going to end the stream here. Thanks, everybody. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have continuously been launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. We need a government of action that fights for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. A government of action, fight for working families. Thanks. Oh, thank you, Herb Bryant. Much appreciated. Government of action, fight for working families. Thanks.